this video is a complete beginner's tutorial for using GitHub with GitHub Desktop with the purpose of using Construct 3 game engine in mind. I'll step you through what a repository is and how you can send things out to remote so you can keep track of your code over time, go back and roll back changes if you make a mistake or something breaks your game, and then how you can use it to keep track of version control over time in Construct 3. We'll also go through a basic workflow of how I suggest you use GitHub Desktop and GitHub with a Construct 3 project. So let's go get started. Let's talk about what exactly a repository is. A repository is basically a file of some sort of online and local storage of all of your code throughout your project. It could include images, it could include text, it could include Python files, HTML files, CSS files, whatever it is that you're programming. And it's a space where you can store all of your work. So I'm going to use GitHub Desktop because I find it's really accessible as a project. So I'm going to open up GitHub Desktop, and I'm going to choose File, New Repository. And inside the repository, you have to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to be calling it a test repo. You cannot have any spaces in your repo name. You have to use underscores or dashes. Description, in this case, whatever it is you're actually working on for your project. It could be robotics, projects, whatever have you. In my case, I'm just going to call this one a test repo for tutorials. And then your local path is where it's actually stored on your computer. So I'm going to choose a separate local path. I'm going to go into my documents. I'm going to go inside, generally stores inside a GitHub folder, and I'm going to just go ahead and choose open here because it's going to make a folder called test repo inside your GitHub folder. I'm going to initialize this with a README. That's effectively some sort of markdown documentation file. Your Git.ignore, you can have it ignore certain files if you don't want to come in. We'll come back to this later, especially for Mac specifically. And then your license is if other people are going to access this repo, what access do you want them to be able to have? I'm personally going to choose MIT license. And then you can see that this repository is going to be created at users, bprat, document, GitHub, and then test repo as a new folder. I'm going to go ahead and choose create repository. And now if I come into my documents folder and go inside GitHub, you'll now notice that I have a new folder called test repo with a license for the MIT license, as well as a readme.md. Now there are currently no local changes inside my repo. Let's go ahead and add in a quick file. So maybe I'll open up a text edit, print. Hello world. Save it over. And now you notice that any new changes that I've added in are now showing up in green, and it's got a nice little green plus file to anything inside of my repo. Now, this repo only exists locally on my computer. I have not actually published this repository up to GitHub. So if I were to sign into my GitHub account, I would not have a repository called test repo currently. In order to do that, I need to actually publish my repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click publish my repository. My name is test repo, its description. I'm going to keep this code private currently. And I'll go ahead and publish this. And what publish does is it actually shares it up onto GitHub. So if I were to go to repository and say view on GitHub, you'll now notice that I have my license, my readme.md, and my test repo. But you'll notice that my hello py is not actually on that repo because I haven't actually made a commit yet to this repo. And what a commit does is it might be saved locally to your computer, but it's not actually saved on remote yet. So I'm just going to give it a description name, create hello py, and my description is test file added. I'll commit this to my master branch, and then I will push my origin. And when I push it, that is what actually puts it up onto remote. So if I were to view this on GitHub now, repository view on GitHub, now you can see that I actually have my hello.py file inside my Git folder. Now, one last thing for your repository that you're going to want to know to do on a Mac computer is you're going to want to add in an ignore file. So I'm going to choose the repository settings, and ignored files, I'm going to put in asterisk /ds_store. This is a file that's get added. It's a hidden file on every single Mac Finder window. It's effectively lets your computer know when the last time you accessed that Finder window was. We want to ignore this file. I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to add in star UI state.json. Now, what the UI state.json does is the UI state is basically it keeps track of your current layout page, if you have the start page open, whatever event sheets you have open, whatever sprites you may have on the page. So it's basically what the UI looks like, the tabs in your Chrome browser or in your Orion browser, whatever it is you're using. So it's not something that we actually want to keep track of, because it means if somebody else opens up a project, then they're going to have the exact same tabs being open, and that's not necessarily something that we need to save over. So I'm going to update the Git.ignore, and I'm going to say ignore UI state changes in construct 3. We'll go ahead and commit that to master, and I'm going to push my origin. Now, let's talk about actually saving projects and what that looks like. Let's say I'm done with my project for the day. I've done some programming, and I want to save over some of my changes. There are two ways you can save projects in Construct. You can do a menu, project. You can save things as a single file or save it as a project folder. If you save it as a single file, that actually makes it a zip file with a .c3p extension, and it overwrites the entire zip file every single time you save it. That's not something we want to do if we're using GitHub for version control. Instead, you want to save a project folder, and I'll show you why in a moment. So I'm going to save it as a project folder. I'm going to make sure that I navigate over to my GitHub repo. I'm going to make a new folder here called game_1 construct folder. You have to make a construct folder, or you have to make some sort of folder to store this inside. Do not make it inside the root folder of your GitHub desktop. We'll give it access to edit those files, and here's why. So let's go over and let's look at that GitHub repo now. If I open up the folder I just saved, you'll notice that I just added about anywhere from 6 to 13 different files. I've got a folder called event sheets, a folder called icons, images, layouts, objects. I have an object typed UI state. I have a project C3P, I have a project UI state, and I have another UI state. So this is why we want to ignore any UI state folders, because we actually have 3 different UI states that we're saving. We've got a whole bunch of little folders here. So what exactly do these things mean? Well, if you look on the side here, they correspond to the exact same layouts in our project. So if I come to my Go Shooter project, that is this full one here, and my layouts folder, open it up, I've got layout 1. If I go to my event sheets folder, open up event sheets, I have event sheet 1.json. And effectively what this JSON file is it is a JSON file of all of the code, any comments that I have for my project. You don't need to know about the JSON, all you need to know is that it corresponds to this. Same thing with object types. If I were to go inside images, I have the images for it. If I were to go inside object types, you'll notice that I have all of my different sprites and tiled backgrounds and all that stuff in here. Now, the reason you want to save this as a folder as opposed to a project file is let's go to GitHub Desktop and let's make an initial commit, and let's say game1 init commit upload init of Ghost Shooter. We'll commit this to master, and we'll go ahead and push our origin. Now, let's say you're going ahead and you're making some changes. You move some sprites around. Maybe you add in another instance of the sprite. Maybe you change the movement speed of this specific sprite. You change the rotation. You come inside code and you add in another option for the player. And you add, he doesn't have any instance variables. Let's go to a global. We'll add, say, 15 to our monster speed. Imagine we've just done some changes to our code. Let's go ahead and save this to our folder, and we'll go look back at GitHub Desktop. You'll notice that the only files that were changed were the files that I made edits to. So for instance, I have the game1 construct folder, event sheets, event sheet 1. This is that new line of code that I added, because I added one new line of code. We can see in this green here, this is the new line that was just added in. If I go to my layout.json, the previous X and Y position of one of those sprites is now a new X and Y position. Same thing for another one of those sprites. It now has a new X and Y position. And then I even added an entire new instance of another monster up over here. So we'll only show you the changes that you made. And the benefit of this is if you were to save it as a single file, you'd rewrite the entire project every single time you went to go save it. Which means if you made a mistake on one specific piece of code, you'd have to go back and recreate the entire project, as opposed to recreating just one section of the project. As well, if you save it as a single file, it's almost impossible to collaborate on a project with a partner. But if you save it as a project folder, what that allows you to do is it allows one partner to say work on layout 1 and one partner to work on layout 2. And then when you save things to GitHub, you will only edit those specific things that you changed. You will not edit the entire project. Yeah? So once I'm done coding for the day, I'm going to add in, a specific summary and commit. So in this case, I'm going to say init2 minor sprite changes. I'll add in a detailed description. Your description should be a little more detailed than this because it allows you to go back in time in your history and figure out what changes you made each day. So for instance, today I did layout 1 edits of sprite positions. I added new layout 2 for next level, and then I also changed starting monster speed. So the more specific I am with descriptions, the more likely it is for me able to go back through my history in time and see where some of those changes were made. So for instance, if I go to history, I can now go back and I can see the changes that I've made each time that I'm going through. The more documentation you give yourself, the easier you're going to have, the easier time you're going to have going back through time. So let's say, for example, I'm doing some programming, and my most recent update where I changed around some monster health fundamentally broke another mechanic in my game. What I can do is I can go back to a previous commit that I did on a previous day, right-click, say revert changes and commit. And what this will do is it will re-change the local folders inside my construct 3 to where the previous state was in that past commit. And if I push the origin, I've now actually removed this from my code base, and I've re-changed the main code base back to the previous day that I was at before. So that's it. That's how you work in GitHub and Construct 3. Again, make sure you save projects as a project folder. In that initial save, you definitely want to save it inside of a folder. Otherwise, you're going to have all of your other repo parts inside of that one folder, and that's going to be a gigantic mess, not something you want to deal with. And then all these specific folders here correspond to all the specific folders over there. So you notice that I actually should have a couple different layouts in here, because I do. And inside event sheets, I probably have a couple different ones now. There we go. So I hope that helped you in working through Game Design and Construct 3 and using GitHub for version control.